For the next lecture, please welcome Professor Jeffrey R. Zorn from the Department of Near Eastern Studies at Cornell University. His research focuses on the reanalysis and republication of the archaeological remains from the Tel El Nasba, which is quite here actually, especially focusing on the 6th century BCE, the Neo-Babylonian period. He is currently working on several publications devoted to subaltern archaeology during the period of the British Mandate. Please welcome Professor Jeffrey R. Zorn.
Thank you. Am I heard well enough? Yes. I think it is just so wonderful that Zorn is following Strite. And I have to give kudos to the organizers for that. And if you don't understand, get your Google out and look it up. So here we have the prototypical middle-aged, not old yet, middle-aged Western white male talking about a Palestinian from a century ago in modern Israel. How strange is that? Okay, so I am going to do the same thing Katrina did. I'm going to wave my hand and I'm going to hope that the people in the slide control area will advance the slides. Slide yet? There we go. Okay. As many people here today probably know, I've spent a little time over the last 30 years reworking materials from Tel El Nasba, excavated by William F. Bade in 5 seasons between 1926 and 1935. Mostly this work has involved reevaluating the architecture and stratigraphy of the site with a few side forays into other topics. Much of my reevaluation of the site has been made possible by the detailed 1 to 100 area plans and section drawings stored in the Bade Museum in Berkeley, California at the Pacific School of Religion. All right, these plans and sections were largely the work of Labib Soriel Abdel Malik, an Egyptian Copt from Luxor, who was the dig architect. Eventually, after looking at plans for 30 years, I wanted to know more about Soriel himself and was able to compile a fair amount of data about his career from 1917 to 1935. The fruit of this labor will be published in an ASOR annual open access volume titled Unsilencing the Archives. This publication fits into the broader current interest of attempting to give voice to the local people who worked on Western-led excavations during the period of the British Mandate over Palestine. Some of them were fairly well known at the time and valued for their skill set, but today they're almost unknown to most scholars in the field. Oh, all right, that's the one. Okay. During my Soriel research, I would often come upon the names of other Middle Easterners who worked at Tel El Nasba with him, and also at other sites at which he worked. These individuals represented different aspects of subaltern archaeology than did Soriel, and so it seemed worthwhile to research and publish what can be currently known about the careers of 2 of Soriel's colleagues in order to provide a fuller view of the archaeological work of the era. One is the Kufti Reis Berberi Mahmoud Aissa. This study is nearly complete, though I hope still to contact his grandson to get answers to a few questions. The other study, which is the subject of the rest of my talk, is devoted to Boulos el Araj, a Palestinian from the town of Ramallah who would later go by the name of Paul Araj. So far, a great deal of work has been done on the Egyptian workers of the period, but a growing body of material is now beginning to emerge on the Palestinians as well. Here I'm following in the footsteps of Mahmoud Hawari, Hamed Salem, Sarah Irving, and Rachel Sparks, who've already done significant work in this area. I thank the organizers of this conference for inviting me to speak here today, the many archives which gave me access to their collections, and the family of Boulos el Araj for family traditions and images and permission to use them. Go to the next one. First, I need to say just a few words about the nature. Question? Is that the forward and backward? Oh, okay. Okay, thank you. First, I need to say a few words about the nature of the materials available for undertaking such a biographical study, as these may be unfamiliar to archaeologists used to working with stones and sherds. There is, however, a wealth of data buried in various sources that we can use to reconstruct the lives of those workers in the field who came before us. In the case of Al-Araj, these include published site reports and articles, Mandate-era archives of the Palestine Department of Antiquities, a great deal of it now online thanks to the efforts of the Israel Antiquities Authority, excavation photographs published in Archival, oh, it worked, institutional correspondence, diaries, account books, and other excavation records, public documents such as newspaper articles and government records, and living descendants. Of course, it's necessary to take into account the human biases and layers of interpretation that went into creating the various records in the first place. Also, as in field archaeology, the surviving data is only a subset of what was originally created. Not everything we might want has survived, even from a period as recent as the British Mandate. Often then, the site archaeologist and the archive archaeologist face similar issues involving the ephemera with which they have to deal. Let me provide just a few general examples of the kinds of problems to be faced in reconstructing even a bare-bones outline of El-Araj's career. Bade maintained account books for his Tel Nasbe excavations, and these are incredibly valuable resources as they provide the salaries of the Middle Eastern staff. However, the accounts for 1926 are missing. Similarly, Bade kept a dig diary of his excavations. Of course, he could not record everything that he witnessed each day. The diaries only record a few of the most important events that stood out in his mind. The diaries were long in the possession of the Bade family. However, the 1927 diary went missing many years ago. Those that covered the other 4 seasons went missing after the death of Bade's daughter in 2008. She was the last known person to have them. Fortunately, she once made for me photocopies of the parts of the diaries related to the excavations, but significant non-archaeological sections were left out. Possibly the original diaries still exist, buried in a storage box somewhere. I would keep waiting for somebody to hit the drums. Or they may have been inadvertently tossed out in the process of clearing out the estate. What about photographic documentation of El-Araj and his career? There are a few pictures of him in the Tel Nasbe archives, but only one shows him at work drawing pottery. The rest are posed staff shots. None of the other archives I've checked have photographs of him either in the field supervising or surveying, or in an office drawing pottery or plans. In many ways, this is not surprising. That was an era when film and processing were relatively expensive. Also, the mid-part of the Mandate era was the period of the Great Depression. Why waste precious resources taking pictures of current workers when the whole object of the program was to recover the biblical world? A few pictures of him in group settings as a youth appear in Shaheen's A Pictorial Atlas, A Pictorial History of Ramallah, and his brother's family has a few pictures of him in later life. Next is the ethnographic record. Boulos el Araj passed away in 1985, almost 40 years ago. However, he has alive today 2 nephews with whom he lived for much of their early lives. There are also several grandnieces who knew him as children. Potentially then, this has the possibility to provide unique insights on his own early life. What stories did he tell his family about his archaeological work? Moreover, the family might have written records in his own hand or photographs of him at work. Sadly, however, he seems to have said little to his family about his archaeological career, and few personal materials of him survive. The older nephew did once make home movies, but these disappeared in a home cleaning purge many years ago. Finally, a special issue I faced in my study are the many variant ways that Arabic names can be translated into Latin characters. Even the same author can give the same name in different forms. Of course, this makes searching for the name more difficult. All the above means that virtually everything we know of the archaeological career of Boulos el Araj is based on partially preserved written records of various types scattered across a dozen archives and around a dozen photographs. In order to appraise his role in the archaeological world of his day, we must first sketch a brief outline of his life and career. Boulos Musa el Araj was born on March 16, 1910 in Ramallah. He was the son of Musa el Araj and Nasra Toda and had 2 brothers and 6 sisters. The most important of these for this talk is his older brother, Boutros el Araj, with whom he was later a business partner. His maternal uncle was Khalil Tota, the Palestinian educator and nationalist, who was a graduate of the Ramallah Friends School and who was later the school's principal. Boulos himself attended the Friends School, the Friends Boys School, became a Quaker, and graduated in 1929. How did Boulos el Araj get drawn into the world of archaeology? It seems that like his older contemporaries, the Egyptians Labib Soriel and his cousin William Gadd, el Araj was trained by Clarence S. Fisher. Fisher probably met him at the Friends Boys School in Ramallah, with which both he and Bade had very cordial relations. Fisher's training seems to have been extensive and thorough. El Araj's various duties at the sites on which he worked included surveying, laying out squares, and drawing plans and sections of excavation areas and tombs, drawing pottery, supervising excavations, locating tombs, administrative tasks such as bookkeeping, picking up money, liaising with local people and the Egyptian staff, and finally general managerial oversight as a clerk of the works. This is a very respectable skill set in any era, and it is no wonder that he was in demand at the time. His career, however, was relatively brief, spanning 10 years from 1926 or 1927 to 1936. Yet, in those 10 years, he worked at least 10 different excavations. The first 4 of these, probably Megiddo, Tel Nasbe, Batin, and Beth Shemesh, took place or began while he was still a student at the Friends School. There's one note in a baser about how Albright left him at Bethel with a few workers and checked in now and then. His other work was at Bet Shean, Jericho, Tel Beit Mersim, Bezur, Et Tel, and Tel Kesan. His archaeological career came to an end in 1936 when he was only 26, and he would live another almost 50 years beyond that. The year 1937 marks a surprising and intriguing turn in the life of Boulos el Araj. In that year, at the age of 27, he left Palestine never to return or see his parents again, and immigrated to the United States. His naturalization record states that he arrived in New York City on October 28, 1937 via the Italian liner SS Conte de Savoia. Assuming that he traveled 3rd class, his fare would have been about $140 to $145 then, which is about $3,100 today. Very quickly, he moved on to Victoria, Texas. And who could have seen that one coming? His name then changes to Paul Araj, as his brother Boutros became Peter Araj. He lived most of the rest of his life there with his brother Peter's family, including sister-in-law Lulu and nephews Philip and Jimmy, except for 1945 to 1950 when the family moved to Anaheim, California. Why would a young Palestinian man move to Victoria, Texas? This is southwest of Houston. Many factors may have been at work. First, his older brother Peter was already married and living there. Economic conditions were not so good at home, and he may have seen this as an opportunity for a fresh start. Second, this was in the middle of the riots of 1936 to 1939 that rocked Palestine. Perhaps this was a chance to escape that chaos and violence. Finally, the family preserves a tradition that he was in love with a woman who was betrothed to another man, and the woman was Jewish. In other words, a broken heart may have played a part and may also be a factor in why he never married. Remember, not everything is economics and politics. When he arrived, he still considered himself an archaeologist, even listing that as his profession in the 1940 census. These are my favorite pictures. However, he soon moved on from that, and he and his brother became partners in a series of restaurants over the years. The most famous of these was the Jet Drive-In, named after the local Foster Air Base. They were also part owners in Lulu's women's clothing store. Quite the change of professions, eh? After his brother's death in 1964, the Jet was sold and he worked exclusively in the clothing store. Declining health limited him mostly to managing the physical plant of the store. Isn't it amazing what you can find on the internet? Paul Araj died in 1985 at the age of 75 and is buried in the Colonial Gardens Cemetery near Victoria, Texas. How does Boulos el Araj, or Paul Araj, fit into the colonialist world of Mandate-era archaeology? First, because of his education and the training and sponsorship he received from Fisher, he was not a manual laborer nor a site guard. On the other hand, he did not have a higher level education the way some other Palestinians involved in the archaeology and ethnography of the 1920s and 30s had. In other words, he had a good set of skills that made him valuable as a member of the technical staff of any excavation of that era. Unlike many Christian and Muslim Palestinian archaeologists of the era, he was not employed in the Palestine Department of Antiquities, making him a relatively rare case. Instead, he was employed by non-governmental, mostly foreign-led excavations. So he was not tied into the racially restrictive, social, and hierarchical administration of the British. Instead, he was free to act and negotiate in his own best interests. This is hinted at in records from Tel Beit Mersim, where Albright considers El Araj's salary and living stipend from other recent excavations on which he had worked before he can decide on what he might offer him to come to work at his site. Boulos's position in the world of Mandate-era archaeology is nowhere better attested than in the diverse and scattered records relating to his salary. He starts off with a monthly salary of £5 to £6.5 while still in high school, but soon after graduation is making £10. Then for a couple years, he's in the 14 to 16 pound range, and for the final few years, he's up to 20 to 23 pounds. His salary grows fourfold in a 10-year career. It's especially useful to look at the figures for the seasons of 1929, 1932, and 1935 at Tel Nasbe. In 1929, he makes the same 6.5 pounds as the sub-raises, Egyptians usually fairly skilled with field work, and he's making a bit more than the cook. However, he makes much less than the head rais, or gad, and less than a third of what Sorial made. By 1932, he's making about the same 15 pounds as the quite experienced gad at 14, and more than any of the raises. By 1935, his 22-pound salary is more than double the 9 pounds of the head rais and his fellow Palestinian Ode Jirius, and over 3 times the 7 pounds that the sub-raises and cook earned. And it matches that of Sorial, though Sorial also received a 6-pound-a-month living stipend. Boulos el Araj's free agency and ability to navigate the non-Department of Antiquities excavation social network, combined with what must have been a solid work ethic, seems to have served him well. This is a costume party. Another indication of his status appears in the few notices that mention his site accommodations. In 1929 at Bet Shemesh, he shares a tent with Labib Sorial and William Gadd. Their accommodations are hierarchically set between those of the Western staff and the Egyptian raises who supervise the Palestinian workforce. In a later season, Grant reports that El Araj and another worker had especially curtained off quarters at the site, again similar to the situation of Sorial and Gadd at Tel Nasbe. Also at Nasbe, he attends parties with the Western staff, which the raises do not. Finally, it should be noted that excavation directors universally praised him for his work, whether it be in official publications, excavation diaries, or correspondence. Had he not immigrated to America and made a new life for himself away from archaeology, it's impossible, of course, to know what trajectory his life would have taken. However, conditions for Palestinians during the riots of 1936 to 39 were not easy. did not improve during World War II and became especially fraught with the founding of the State of Israel in 1948, many hostilities, which flooded Ramallah with refugees and led to the exodus of many of the local inhabitants. I never knew in all my years at Berkeley there was a Ramallah expat community south of San Francisco. I learned that while I was doing this. After the 1948 war, Ramallah was under Jordanian control, and if he had remained there, life might have been relatively quiet. On the other hand, there would have been few avenues for him to pursue an archaeological career in the West Bank. Jordan did not invest much in archaeological projects in that area, and American projects affiliated with ASOR only began again in the mid-1950s, about 20 years after his last work at Tel Quaysan. If he and his extended family had survived the tumult of that period and remained in Ramallah, he might well have left archaeology for some other career, such as happened after he arrived in the United States. So, despite the relative briefness of his career, Boulos el Araj is an important example of an early 20th century Palestinian archaeologist, one who successfully navigated the political, economic, and social dynamics of the world of colonial archaeology between the world wars. Thank you. He was also supposed to be a very good bowler, having done several 300-point games.